So I thought it'd be a good idea to take my phone into the premiere with me to Spider-Man No Way Home so I could get live footage of my reaction to this movie. Let's go to that footage. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the after credits scene. Thanks for tuning in with us. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications if you want to, so when we drop new content, you'll be the first to know about it. But help us get to 100 subscribers before the new year. We're getting real close, and we need your help to do it, so share this video anywhere you can. But again, thank you for watching. This movie was phenomenal. I'm going to try to give a spoiler-free introduction review of this thing, and then we'll move into heavy spoilery territory because I just can't talk about this without spoiling everything. Far as I'm concerned, I've had to re-rank my Marvel movies. This one very well may be the best Marvel movie thus far. I know Captain America and the Winter Soldier, Infinity War, Endgame, those are way up there. But there were things about this movie and things that happened and the way that it came together and the way that it was written. Without getting information and opinions from other people, it's really hard to know where this one sits. But for me, one of the best Marvel movies probably that I have seen in terms of scope, in terms of what they did, in terms of how it was written, in terms of the way it wrapped up two other movies and then moved some things forward. Really, really well done. I have to admit, up until this point, I kind of felt like, even though John Watts as a director put together two really good Spider-Man films, I didn't consider him a really great director. I know that I don't know a lot about him. I haven't seen a ton of his movies, and I'm only going off of the two Spider-Man movies that I have seen prior to this, but the way this one was put together and the way he blended everything and cut it together and made the story flow, especially for a 2.5-hour movie, was phenomenal. So just a real quick discussion about this here, a spoiler-free review. I thought the stories were blended really well. I mean, we've all seen in the trailers that there are multiple villains to contend with. Doctor Strange is in this movie. The different storylines and the things that they had to blend from the other movies and then bringing in these other elements. The stories were blended together really well. The dialogue was very carefully chosen, and the big emotional moments were at just the right tone. The fights in this movie were a lot more brutal than I had anticipated. A lot of Spider-Man fights, even though they're difficult and they're tough, did not feel very weighty. They always felt like Spider-Man was playing around, and these felt painful. They hurt to watch. They had emotion to them in ways that I hadn't seen thus far, and it really made for some more intense scenes. All of the interactions throughout the movie with different characters and different types of characters and all those kind of things, the interactions were not forced. Everything felt very natural. And then the transition from one setting, one scene to another, how do they get from this to that? How do they up the stakes? Felt really natural and not forced as well. It was when it was time for certain things to happen, they happened, and you didn't feel like off-put. It didn't feel jarring for certain things to happen. And then when they did, and it upped the stakes, it just felt natural, and by the time you got to the end and the final act and everything was so big and on the line, and it made sense and you were brought along with it, and you kind of knew everything was going to turn out well, but you also kind of knew, this can't all end well. There's too many moving parts. And so I loved all of those things. Stick with us as we go through the spoiler-heavy review here. So if you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want to see any spoilers, you're going to have to leave us now. But after you've seen the movie, catch us right back up here. Going to talk a little bit about timeline. Going to break down the movie, kind of scene section by section, and then kind of give you some Easter eggs at the end. So stick around for some of those things, and we'll talk about that and those amazing after credit scenes. So timeline-wise, let's just kind of get ourselves from Endgame to this movie and include some of the Marvel TV shows as well. So you have Endgame that happens in 2023, sometime in 2023. WandaVision happens about 4 to 6 weeks after Endgame ends, so it is in 2023 somewhere. Falcon and the Winter Soldier happens several months after WandaVision. Loki is somewhere in between all of that because a lot of it happens outside of time. But timeline-wise, we've been told it happens after some of those other things. Then you get Eternals, which their story kind of happens separately from those things. Shang-Chi is in there as well, and it takes place end of 23, somewhere in the middle of 2024. And then Far From Home happens 8 months after Endgame, so all of these other things have happened. And then Far From Home happens. No Way Home picks up right where Far From Home ends, but you have about a semester's worth of storyline in there with MJ, Ned, all these characters during No Way Home. One of the time jumps happens rather quickly when all three of them are waiting on their acceptance letters from different colleges. We know they're in their senior year because they have to go back to school after the big revelation that Peter is Spider-Man. And then you get all of the, waiting on the different college acceptance letters that happen. So that's sometime in fall of 2024. There's a remark by MJ's boss that she needed to take down the Halloween decorations, so it's past Halloween of 2024, and then we see Spider-Man swinging over Rockefeller Center at the end of the movie, and that's where the same time frame as Hawkeye as well. So those kind of coincide right there. Don't know that we will get any kind of big crossover in this last episode. Marvel can do anything they want to, and I wouldn't put it past them. But I think this Hawkeye story is going to kind of take care of itself, and maybe they're kind of ships passing in the night that those things happen so quickly that it's just stuff that pops up on the news. But everybody forgets that Peter Parker exists at the end of this movie. So there might be some discussion about Spider-Man, but there's not going to be any discussion about Peter Parker, especially from Clint or any of those guys. So just a breakdown of the entire movie. The way this thing started off, there were so many, I'm going to say cameos, but there were so many things that they added, that they put into this that they didn't have to. Explaining that Wong is now the Sorcerer Supreme. When Peter goes to visit Doctor Strange and says, hey, do you think you could make it so that people didn't know that I was around? They did a little trickery there with the trailers, because in the trailers, Wong says, hey, don't cast that spell, but that's not actually what happens. And Doctor Strange is played off as a lot more responsible, saying, we just got done messing with time and you want me to do it again. Fit his personality a lot better. But then the conversation they have about him forgetting, and then as they have that conversation in the basement or the Undercroft where Strange is casting the spell, it's a little more responsible of Strange, and it makes more sense to say, oh yeah, I can fix that, I can add that, but then Peter ends up messing it up. And then Strange being able to contain the spell made a little more sense as well. It made a little more sense for how powerful he was, and that it was something that could be fixed, but there was this little side quest that Spider-Man had to go on because some different characters had an opportunity to come through. I was surprised that they did not give you more of how the multiverse works in this movie. I think Marvel, after seeing this movie, has done a really good job of building you towards that and giving you some of the rules and letting you know it's coming, but because it's such a big idea, I actually like the fact that they're only giving it to you in pieces. That they're opening it up just long enough to say, hey, these characters are coming through from other places. They have their own storylines. They have their own lives, and they don't necessarily look like you, but they might be you, as in, Peter Parkers and all these kind of different things. And so giving you the little pieces was really great. And I think when we get to Multiverse of Madness, it's really going to open it up, and they're going to have more time to really explain what this is and how it functions. I think we're really going to get, at some point, this is how this works, and this is how you get from place to place, and this is how you get from reality to reality, universe to universe, so to speak. And so I didn't mind it as much, but there was so much good story in this movie, and it still felt like a Spider-Man story. I know that was one of the critiques with Captain America Civil War, is that third act felt more like an Avengers 2.5 rather than a Captain America movie, even though it had a lot of political undertones. This one still felt like a Spider-Man movie, even though it had Doctor Strange in it, it had all these other elements, it had these multiverse things that pushed it into other territory and really moved the MCU forward. I think there's going to be a lot of fallout from this, and a lot of things we haven't thought about that are fallout and things that are consequences of the fact that people don't know that Peter Parker exists anymore. Just hitting the highlights real quick, and we'll talk about some of my favorite moments. Matt Murdock popping up as the lawyer for May and Peter and Happy. Fantastic. I loved that they didn't tease it. They didn't, oh, this and that, and we got to get a lawyer. It was natural. And then when he shows up in their apartment, you see that cane hit the ground, and you just knew. I know they kind of leaked some of those images, but to see it actually happen and to have it confirmed on screen right in front of you, to see him in person with his red glasses talking to other MCU characters was a highlight for me, because I'm a huge Daredevil fan. And so seeing those things and seeing him talk, and even getting the little bit of what he's capable of, and the interaction between him and Peter, where Peter's spider senses start tingling because a brick comes through the window and Matt stops it with his hand, was just phenomenal. And of course the line, how did you do that? And Matt just says, I'm a really good lawyer. Just amazing. The quippy little interactions, to see how the gritty nature of that character is going to end up fitting in with some of the lightheartedness of the MCU, I think is going to be really exciting. And there are moments, even in this movie and then in Endgame and other places, where we've seen the Marvel Universe get very dark. And the trailer for Multiverse of Madness made it seem like it gets even darker. And so I think this new feel of the MCU, where it's still very quippy, but it gets into some darker, more ominous territory, is really going to blend really well with some of those characters. And like I said, just seeing Matt Murdock on screen was fantastic. Aunt May dying, I think got to hit that pretty quick before we get to some of the other stuff, was heart-wrenching, but it needed to happen for several reasons. One, Peter has not had a moment like the other Peter Parkers where he had significant loss, where his character really had to struggle through something. A lot of things happened to him. He was blipped out of existence, and things happened to him, but none of it is so gut-wrenching that he really had to deal with it. And so he needed one of those moments. That moment being the time where this version of Peter Parker gets his own. With great power comes great responsibility, was played off very well, and then and made it hit home really, really well. And then when you see the other Peter Parkers coming into the movie, and they all get to kind of share that moment where Uncle Ben said that to me, and Toby finishes Peter's line, that they had these natural connections that really endeared the three of them together, that made for some really great moments in this movie, just over and over and over these great moments. And that's why I said, I don't know, for me, having watched it, and I was in college in 2002, so going and seeing the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, and then watching all these movies as a college student, and then out of college as an adult with my own children and those kind of things, and then seeing this makes it very different and more nostalgic, and I don't know if I am giving it a higher ranking because of the fan service that it gave me, or because it just really was that great. I would love to get some impressions from some of you guys who did not grow up with these movies, or who these movies are more in the past, a younger viewer, or maybe an older viewer who just got into the MCU with this version of Spider-Man but doesn't really have any connections to the other ones. I'm interested to see where other people place this movie without the nostalgia factor coming into it, because there was a lot of fan service in this movie, but I thought it was done very well and handled very well, and it wasn't just, hey, we're just going to throw you this so that it makes you happy. It fit the story. There were lines from the old movies that fit very, very well. Osborn saying, you know, I'm somewhat of a scientist myself. Doc Ock looking at the arc reactor and saying, the power of the sun in the palm of my hand. Some of these lines just fit very well. And then a little bit of foreshadowing in the form of some Easter eggs that we will get to here at the end. But say all that to say, going back to Aunt May dying, painted the character of Green Goblin in a very, very ominous light. As far as villains are concerned, I don't think DC or Marvel there's ever been one nearly as menacing or as overshadowing of stories as a Joker type character, whether it's Heath Ledger's Joker or even Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, and how brutal and just scary that character is because of what seems like psychosis. But William Dafoe playing Green Goblin in this movie and going between the scared version of Norman Osborn, who doesn't know where he is, who's suffering from dementia, and then snapping into Green Goblin, and just that twist and that voice that you hear and the look on his face when he is interacting with Peter that he loves tormenting him was even more ominous in this movie than it was in the original Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. And the fights between the two of them were absolutely brutal. And the way that they were shot and some of the flips and the acrobatics that happened was just unbelievable. And when it happened, you almost had to stop and go, whoa, did that just happen? And it's one of those things you want to watch in slow-mo and go, how did they just do that? And it just looked really, really crazy. After that interaction, the Osborn fight, the interaction with May, the other thing that was really amazing to see was just the introduction of all the different villains. Right off the bat, the one thing I did not expect that I really loved, that fit the character very well, was that Flint Marko was not necessarily a bad guy. Seeing the interaction between Electro and Flint as Peter is trying to fight them, and Flint coming to his rescue, and just the quick interaction where Peter says, I'm not your Peter, but I'll explain everything, and Flint is not necessarily a bad guy. You know, we leave him, and he wasn't bad. He didn't... He kind of had a redemption story in Spider-Man 3 with Tobey, and then to see him here, he didn't need to turn into a villain. And so I'm glad they kind of gave him his own arc and his own storyline there, and they kind of separated the villains into different roles, and then to watch them interact and to see them kind of all together and how their personalities interact was really, really great. Every villain, every character got their own story, in so much as they all had different interactions with Peter Parker and they all had their own motivations. So it didn't feel like, here's all these villains and they're suddenly friends. It didn't fit, but there were times where their motives crossed paths, so they were definitely going to work together. But it was the chaos of the fact that they were all villains and they were out for themselves, even though they were all aimed towards Spider-Man, that made the stakes even that much higher. We get to the biggest reveals, the biggest cheers in the auditorium when we were watching it. The reveal of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire as reprising their roles as Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield, a horrible liar when it comes to, oh, maybe I'm in the movie, maybe I'm not. The whole, oh, it was photoshopped, it was this, it was that. Just painting himself into a corner. I kind of feel bad for the guy because he got asked so many times in different interviews. He's doing press tours for other movies and they're asking him about Spider-Man. You see someone like Tobey Maguire really staying out of the spotlight, and Charlie Cox just saying, look, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I don't want to, if it is or it isn't, I don't want to spoil things. I want people to be excited when they see the movie, or whenever, something happens or doesn't happen. Just go enjoy the movie, whether I'm in it or not. Stuff like that, just having a company line, if you will. And Andrew just failed horribly at that. So, but the way that they were introduced, and not being introduced directly to Spider-Man, not being, or to Tom Holland's Peter Parker, not being thrown right into a battle and just popping up randomly, but that MJ and Ned get to have that interaction first. And so you get to connect with MJ and Ned as viewers of this weird moment, and they get to have a little bit of interaction there before they're just kind of thrown into something even crazier. But to have that go on right after Aunt May dies, and then Ned has this moment where, I have this Sorcerer Supreme power, and then for Andrew to come through, and then for Toby to come through, and then kind of interact with each other was really great. The scene on the rooftop right after that, where MJ and Ned are able to console Peter, was super emotional, and the acting in this movie just fantastic. But MJ saying, "Hey, there's some other people here." Peter senses them, and to see them kind of up in the scaffolding, their silhouettes, and then them kind of hop down and have this interaction with Peter, was again fan servicey, but it was moments you didn't know you needed, things that you didn't realize were important to you, things that you didn't realize could be done with the characters, that when they happened, you went, it kind of blew your mind. The interactions between the three of those Spider-Men, talking about, I've been thinking for a long time about how to cure Norman Osborn, or I've been thinking for a long time, or hey, I cured Dr. Connors a long time ago, so I can handle that. Toby saying, well, I fought this guy and I fought that guy and I fought an alien from another world, and Peter says, well, yeah, I did too, but I was on another planet, I was in space. And then Andrew Garfield saying, I fought a guy in a rhino costume. Just these interactions that made for a lot of fun. They gave you backstory. They weren't forced, but it kind of played up that quippy nature of Spider-Man. And the three of them got to interact and kind of, I won't say commiserate, because they definitely did, but just connect on this level that nobody else in the movie could connect with, that they didn't even know they were connected. Those interactions made me really excited for the other multiversal characters that are going to pop in other places, and the interactions that you never knew you needed, but you're going to get because of the multiverse. I am so excited to see where Marvel goes with that and what they do with it. Right down to the fan servicey moments of the little meme, the animated meme of the different Spider-Men pointing at each other, and then you get kind of that moment on the Statue of Liberty. When the three of them talk and Tom Holland's character says, look, I worked with the Avengers. I worked with this group of people. You kind of realize, he's the only one that's actually had a partnership with anybody. And he says, look, we just got to work together. We got to use our senses. We got to use these things. It showed how he had progressed, especially with the spider senses. They even show it to you in a little different way whenever Strange pops Peter out into his astral form, and you see the spider senses tingling, and he has the ability to move back into his body. There were elements in which Peter is stronger than you realize, and that was kind of the theme throughout the movie, is that Peter Parker is stronger than you realize, and he had to realize that too. And all these things that happened to him, I'm excited to see where the story goes beyond this, where he pops up, how he pops up in different movies, how they use him, and to get more of his story. But as those Spider-Men work together, and then they're going around and shooting their webs and flipping over each other and kind of working together, those shots were amazing. And then you get kind of the silhouetted shot of all the Spider-Men on the top of the Statue of Liberty. Was, again, fan servicey, but shots you didn't know you needed. That the story was so good, you just wanted to see how the story ended up, and you were just loving the spectacle of seeing them on screen together. I loved that it wasn't a minute or two, it wasn't a cameo. They were actually in this movie for a good period of time. And it wasn't just about them having power and being overpowering as Spider-Man, but they used their smarts, that they interacted in a lot of different ways. And so it was very satisfying in all kinds of senses. Just really fantastic stuff. The different spider suits that they went through. I love the metaphor of Peter's suit being kind of sullied by being stained with the green goo, almost as though Mysterio was the one that did it. And if you didn't count up, you got your Sinister Six, but you had 5 villains that were together in this movie: Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Sandman, Electro, Lizard. But the 6th member at the beginning of the movie, the 6th member of the Sinister Six is Mysterio, because Mysterio is the one that kicks all this off. But at the end, with the bonus scenes, your 6th member of the Sinister Six is going to be Venom. And so just the idea that they can rotate in and out was really cool. And who's going to pop up and who's going to be these characters is going to be really exciting to see where they decide to go. And then, of course, with Sony, you've got the Morbius movie coming, and probably some Kraven the Hunter stuff and some Rhino stuff, and who knows what's coming. So really exciting. Good to see, amazing different things. But with that spider suit, I love the metaphor of that suit being sullied and then him having to flip it inside out. So it looked like some kind of weird Doctor Strange type suit, but it was just he flipped it inside out. And the idea that his world has been flipped on its head, that he's not quite what he needs to be, was very interesting. And then getting the nano suit, the different little things with the nano suit where he was able to overpower Doc Ock because the nanotechnology was connected to his suit and he could overpower him. Just very simple, natural things that moved the story forward in ways that you didn't have to go, well, how's he going to beat Doc Ock? Because Toby took a whole movie to figure out how to beat him. But this version of Peter Parker he just took care of him. And so there were things that really worked well, that moved the story forward, and some new and interesting interactions that happened in this movie that were just fantastic, and it was just really, really well done. Moving on to Easter eggs, and then we'll get to the after credits, and we'll kind of wrap this up. Some Easter eggs. You're going to have to go back and watch it because obviously I can't give you clips of these Easter eggs because I don't have clips of the movie. But the Rogers musical is going on well before Christmas, before Hawkeye ever sees it. So the Rogers musical gets some billboards in this movie. You got to see a quick shot of Del Mar's when Peter is getting Mary Jane safely back to her house in Queens as they go into the subway. And then they pop up in front of Del Mar's. So you get to see that he has rebuilt from the explosion in Spider-Man Homecoming. The fact that Flash has his tennis outfit on, his Roger Federer looking costume there. But the Flashpoint book that Flash has, where he talks about, I know Peter Parker and I knew this. Then let me tell you about it from my perspective. The Flashpoint joke, the little poke or nod to DC, where the Flash goes back and changes reality and lives in a different reality because of the mistakes that he's made, was a really cool nod and a really cool poke at DC, given the fact that reality is kind of thrown on its head in this movie, and the MCU is opening up the multiverse, where DC is going to introduce their multiverse in the Flash movie coming up. I thought it was really funny, and just for whatever reason, just kind of a jab or kind of a, hey, we see you, was really, really funny. As Peter is changing into different outfits and putting on a t-shirt, getting out of his Spider-Man costume right there at the beginning, he puts on the t-shirt that Tony gave him in Spider-Man Homecoming when he takes the suit away from him. It's that shirt that says, I survived NYC, when he comes back home after that interaction with Tony on the barge, the ferry. So there's a throwback to Tony Stark there. Damage Control being the ones that are coming after Peter and trying to fix these things. Damage Control is an extension of Stark Industries. It's an extension of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and those kind of things. Damage Control is one of those entities, so it has some connections to Tony as well. The protection orb that Strange uses to contain the spell that he casts that goes awry. That orb pops up in the What If series. These little protection orbs, these hexagon-looking things, these crystallized-looking things, pop up in the What If television series on Disney+. In addition to that, the lines where Peter is talking to Doctor Strange, he says, "What if we could prevent this? What if we could do that? What if we could change their fate?" Is a theme that runs throughout parts of the What If series, particularly with the Watcher. And then the after credit scene with Doctor Strange, the different version of Doctor Strange that pops up in What If, who is kind of possessed with all these different entities because he's been amassing power, pops up in What If, but he also pops up in that Doctor Strange trailer as well. So it's worth going back, even if you don't like, cartoon type things or whatever. It's worth going back to see elements from other multiverses that are going to pop up in these live action stories, because they are all part of the same MCU. So I really love those little Easter eggs. Also, in his astral form, you get to see kind of the little lines, the little lightning lines that indicate Peter's spider senses that come up in the comic books. That's how they kind of show that he has spider senses. And you kind of get to see those a little bit in his astral form with kind of the wavy lines that are around him that make him kind of look like a ghost. I loved how they used his spider senses more prominently in this movie, that he could recognize things that he had, that there was something different about these people, not just that he could see things coming, but like he knew when Norman Osborn had kind of flipped the switch and become the Green Goblin again. Those kind of things were really fantastic. Two other blink and you'll miss them Easter eggs as the multiverse is ripping open and Strange is trying to contain it. And he says that all these different people who know who Peter Parker is are coming through into our world. Presumably, I'm assuming around that time, at least those couple of days there, that's when the Venom after credit scene where Tom Hardy ends up in our universe, and then where he disappears again with the after credit scene in this movie. That little time period is obviously where that happened. That he just pops in at that moment, doesn't know why he popped in, but he's way off somewhere else, and he doesn't actually have time to figure out what's going on before being thrown back to his own universe. So, but in that moment where the multiverse is being ripped open, you see these silhouettes of different characters. One of them is a character holding a spear that has a big fluffy something coat around him. That would be Kraven the Hunter. And then another one, which is a lot easier to pick out, is the silhouette of the rhino-looking character from the end of Amazing Spider-Man, who was Paul Giamatti's character in that movie, but very well could be somebody different, or maybe they don't even bring him in later on. But you get to see those two characters, and so just blink and you miss it moments, things that they added. And then the final Easter egg that I noticed that I thought was really fantastic was when Electro sees Peter unmasked, and he says, "Oh, I didn't recognize you. I didn't know that you would be so young, and I also thought you would be black." And of course, Andrew Garfield says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disappoint you." And Electro responds, "Well, there's if there's three of you here, there's got to be a black one out there somewhere, right?" And of course, that being a nod to Miles Morales. And so maybe we get some of that live action later on as well. But I love the little teases. Again, they felt, even though they were quippy and they were fan service, they felt very natural and fun and just part of the story. And it just made for that much more of an exciting movie to watch. It was a spectacle. It was just a lot of fun to watch. So the after credit scenes, Tom Hardy's character being in there, I loved the nature of that story. Him and the bartender going back and forth, which if you've seen Ted Lasso, you recognize the bartender as Danny Rojas. But seeing those conversations between the two of those guys and him saying, "Okay, so there was an alien and people were gone for 5 years, and there's a guy in a suit that flies around," is just him trying to piece things together, the journalistic nature of Eddie Brock. And then him being phased out back into his own reality, but leaving behind a part of his symbiote was a really nice touch. And how that character pops up and who inhabits the Venom symbiote is going to be really interesting to see as well. And then the extra long after credit scene in the form of the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness trailer, where you got to see Mordo, you got to see some behind shots of America Chavez in her denim shirt with the star on the back of it. You got to see Shuma Gorath, which was really crazy with the the tentacles and that whole crazy thing. And then some of the conversations with Strange and Wong. You got to see Wanda. You got to see Rachel McAdams' character, Christine. And the real quick interaction between Strange and Wanda where she says, I know, I expected you to show up. I know people got hurt in Westview. And he says, look, I'm not here about that. I was actually kind of relieved that, like, they're going to let her get away with it. I wouldn't want that to happen, and I know she's going to have to, she feels bad enough on her own, but just that there's other things at work here, and that maybe Wanda is not necessarily a bad guy in this story, to me makes for a much better story rather than just pitting these two against each other. Because they could have done that in this movie and made Spider-Man and Strange have to fight against each other the entire time, but they really don't. They introduce Strange and he moves the story forward, but then they remove him from the story so that it's still a Spider-Man story, but then they bring him back in when they need to. It's just very well done, very well written. I think they're going to do the same thing with Wanda in Multiverse of Madness, that she's not going to be this antagonist, but she's going to be an integral part of the story where she needs to be. Same with Chiwetel Ejiofor's Baron Mordo. Really cool to see him with the cornrows. Made him look a little more ominous and interesting. And then the reveal there at the end of the dark version of Doctor Strange was really awesome. And I told some people sitting next to me in the theater who went, who is that guy? I told them at the end of as we're walking out, you guys got to go home and watch some cartoons, because that story, as heart-wrenching as it is pretty integral to that What If series, right there in the middle, episode 3 or 4, with regard to how Doctor Strange becomes that way in another reality. That movie looks very dark, very ominous. Interested to see where they go with it, and I bet you that is all they can show you of that movie, because there's so much insanity that happens. And if they were willing to give you those scenes, what did they not show you? Because there's just so much that they could do with those stories. So thank you guys for sticking with us. Thank you guys for paying attention. Usually these review videos are a lot longer than some of my other ones, and so I appreciate you hanging around. Subscribe, hit the notifications, like this video. Check out some of our other videos over here. We got a whole lot of other things that you can check out. And as always, when the next one drops, we'll catch you right back here. Later, guys.